The dawn of February 28, 1995, brought a horrific shock to Regina Krieger's father. Upon entering his daughter's bedroom, he encountered a nightmarish scene. Instead of the expected comfort, the room was completely covered in blood. Law enforcement and forensic experts spent considerable time unable to locate the minor's body. However, when it finally reached the hands of criminology service professionals, they were stunned by the unprecedented brutality of the crime and the unbearable suffering the young girl had endured before her death. The horrific events unfolded in the city of Twin Falls, located in the state of Idaho, United States of America. At the time of the crime, the town's population was slightly less than 32,000 residents. Today, this number has doubled. Twin Falls appears to be a small, neat, and extremely attractive settlement. At first glance, it seems like an ideal place for peaceful family life and raising children. However, even in the most tranquil corners, true monsters in human form can emerge. Regina Krieger was born on March 3, 1980, to Rhonda Freeman and Daniel Krieger. The girl was always distinguished by her cheerfulness, had a wide social circle, and a younger brother named Clifton. Her passion was water skiing. She was actively involved in the local youth ski club at Lake Murtaugh. Moreover, Regina was a deeply religious girl and took an active part in the youth group of the local Lutheran church. However, with the onset of adolescence, significant transformations began to occur in her life. In 1994, Regina's parents terminated their marital relationship, which profoundly and painfully affected the child's psychological and emotional state. The situation was further complicated by the permanent disputes between the couple regarding the division of shared property. In the autumn of that same year, the girl expressed a desire to live with her father. Her mother initially resisted but eventually, being completely absorbed by property disputes, agreed to transfer her daughter to her father. From December 1994, Regina lived with her father in a relatively stable home atmosphere. Soon, striking changes began in the girl's behavior. Her habits, appearance, and social circle underwent cardinal transformations. In January 1995, she fell into a questionable company of middle school students in the city of Burley, where she was studying in the 9th grade at the time. Her parents were aware of the existing problems but could not comprehend their essence. Family relationships gradually deteriorated. Eventually, the girl independently decided to terminate communication with her negative social circle. She was provided psychological support, referred to a professional psychological consultant whose task was to help the girl overcome the consequences of her parents' divorce. A trusting relationship was established between the psychologist and Regina, which proved incredibly beneficial for the young girl. She candidly shared with the specialist her intention to leave the educational institution. She explained her decision by low academic performance and systematic truancy. This was preceded by an official written warning from the school about possible expulsion due to exceeding the permissible number of absences. However, Regina subsequently changed her mind and decided to make efforts to improve her academic performance and retain her place in school. On February 27, 1995, she again expressed a desire to discontinue her education and start working. The psychologist and school teachers, aware of the complicated adolescent period, provided her with an additional chance. The girl was offered the opportunity to attend several training sessions before the exams, which would enable her to obtain the necessary number of credits and avoid repeating the academic year. Regina agreed to use this opportunity and intended to continue her education. That day, after an intense school day, she returned home, where she lived with her father and brother on the second floor of the house. Her personal bedroom was located in the basement. That evening, the family gathered at the family table, had dinner, discussed a range of important issues, including her education, and at 11 p.m. they dispersed to their respective bedrooms. This evening would forever be the last moment when Regina Krieger was seen alive. The morning hours of February 28, 1995, began with a tragic surprise for the Krieger family. Clifton, Regina's younger brother, attempting to locate his sister, as all family members were already awake, began calling out to her loudly. Receiving no response, the teenager descended to her bedroom. The scene he encountered immediately alarmed the boy. The floor and walls were laminated with blood stains, but Regina herself was nowhere to be found. Frightened, he immediately rushed to his father, reporting the horrific discovery. Daniel Krieger immediately descended to the basement, personally confirming his son's account. The empty bedroom indeed created an oppressive impression. Blood stains covered almost the entire area of the room. Without wasting time, the man called the 911 rescue service and began making phone calls to his daughter's relatives and friends, hoping to determine her whereabouts. Initially, the father hoped that Regina, like a typical disobedient teenager, had simply run away to acquaintances. However, these assumptions instantly dissipated when all close friends categorically denied such a version. Law enforcement arrived at the scene quite quickly, but their behavior did not inspire particular confidence. The officers acted without proper interest, formally examining the premises. Extracting clothing with blood traces and a training sword for martial arts, they almost immediately put forward an initial theory. The only thing the constables noticed was the absence of signs of breaking or unauthorized entry into the house. It seemed that the girl, by their logic, could have left voluntarily, possibly staging her own kidnapping. Daniel Krieger categorically rejected such a version. Why would his daughter need to stage a theatrical performance with blood, scattering bloody stains to imitate an escape? This contradicted any logic. Eventually, after hearing the father's arguments, investigators still began a more thorough investigation. It should be noted that the technical capabilities of law enforcement at that time were extremely limited. High-precision DNA analysis techniques had not yet become widespread, and video surveillance was rare. This catastrophically narrowed the search possibilities. In the first hours of the investigation, suspicions fell on the closest circle, the father and brother of the missing girl. They were subjected to polygraph testing, which both passed without any complaints. However, the father was still not excluded from the circle of suspects, simply due to the absence of other candidates. Daniel and Clifton claimed that they had slept soundly the previous night and heard nothing suspicious. At that moment, Regina was considered missing. The bloody traces indicated serious violence and active resistance by the girl, while simultaneously being insufficient to definitively state her death. Assumptions were made about a possible escape or kidnapping. The investigation's logic was simple: an unknown perpetrator must have been familiar with Regina, otherwise, it would be impossible to explain their entry into the premises without any signs of breaking in. A key evidentiary source was the girl's personal diary. It contained detailed notes about family circumstances, parental divorce, and the associated emotional experiences. Police also discovered that Regina had a secret boyfriend named Isidro, about whom she had concealed information from her family. According to descriptions, he was a Latino teenager, a resident of Twin Falls, the grandson of a couple living near the Krieger family in Burley. It was known that he moved around in a green pickup truck and studied at the local school. Law enforcement began an active search for the young man, hoping to obtain additional information. However, all attempts proved futile. Neither the car, nor the relatives, nor Isidro himself could be found. Investigators suggested that Isidro's presence in Regina's diary might be a psychological self-defense fabrication. Against the backdrop of emotional stress caused by her parents' divorce, the girl might have created an imaginary boyfriend as a mechanism for coping with internal experiences. Consequently, this information was not given significant importance. The Krieger family was in a state of complete emotional collapse. They were stunned and bewildered, unable to imagine further steps in the search. Despite everything, each family member cherished hope until the last moment of finding Regina alive. To obtain additional information and search for witnesses, approximately 30,000 information leaflets were printed. They were distributed throughout the city, posted on streets, handed to passers-by, and placed in public spaces. On the fateful day of April 15, 1995, a female body with clear signs of significant decomposition was discovered near the Snake River Channel. The location was 15 kilometers from the missing miner's house. Forensic experts immediately determined that the body belonged to a young girl no older than 20 years. By April 17, specialists managed to complete full identification through dental records. The horrific confirmation did not take long. The body belonged to Regina Krieger. Several knife wounds were found on the body, including a critical one, a severed carotid artery. The girl's death was extremely cruel and torturous. The case was immediately reclassified from a missing person case to intentional murder. Information spread quickly through the town, causing unprecedented anxiety among local residents. Since Twin Falls was a small, compact settlement, the version of a potential serial killer instantly triggered panic moods. People began to fear leaving their own homes, carefully locking all possible locks. The father of Regina was particularly concerned, as her younger son Clifton was only 13 years old at the time. However, the increased vigilance of the population did not advance the investigation in any way. No specific testimonies or useful leads came to the police. Subsequently, detectives obtained new interesting information. It turned out that at the time of entering a questionable company, Regina had met local dealers. A man named Hubert Forras Rodriguez particularly stood out. Investigators proposed a version that the motive for murder could have been non-payment for received goods or the existence of a significant debt. At the time of the investigation, Hubert was 32 years old. Formerly unemployed, he constantly moved between Burley and Twin Falls, engaged in distributing prohibited substances. It was known that Rodriguez was part of one of the local criminal gangs. He was generally considered an extremely dangerous individual, with whom it was better not to have any dealings. It was especially risky to remain in debt to him. The substances purchased by Regina were quite expensive. It was difficult to imagine the real amount of her potential debt. We are talking about hundreds of dollars, which was an astronomical sum for a 14-year-old girl. However, at that moment, there were no direct evidence of Rodriguez's involvement in the murder. Subsequently, anonymous phone calls began to come to the police with hints of his possible involvement in the crime. But as soon as law enforcement tried to clarify details, the calls would stop. Local residents were obviously afraid of potential problems with the criminal authority. The tips did not contain any specific information, and no evidence against Rodriguez was collected. Detectives viewed him mostly as a participant in criminal schemes related to distribution. Nevertheless, the very fact of communication between a 32-year-old unemployed man and minors looked more than suspicious. Distribution of substances among such an age category was considered a serious criminal offense. Law enforcement desperately needed substantial evidence to bring formal charges. Investigators continued an in-depth study of Regina's environment, and their attention was drawn to a figure named Cody, one of the girl's friends who was also part of her questionable company and purchased substances from Gilbert Rodriguez. It turned out that on the night of the possible murder, Cody was in the company of the dealer. During interrogation, the boy provided extremely confusing testimony. He claimed to have spent the entire evening in a semi-conscious state in the bath. His account was accompanied by excessive nervousness, and his statements repeatedly changed. It seemed that the teenager was hiding something and was under significant psychological pressure. Due to the inconsistency of his story, police were extremely skeptical of his testimony. Gilbert Rodriguez remained the primary suspect in the case. In 1996, officers began active surveillance of the suspect. It was established that Rodriguez had previously been detained in 1991 and 1993 on suspicion of distributing prohibited substances. However, each time investigators failed to gather sufficient evidence for official charges. To finally stop the cunning dealer's criminal activity, the police resorted to an unconventional plan. They detained a boy named Joe, who had previously bought substances from Gilbert, and negotiated cooperation with him. The police promised to forget some episodes of his criminal past if he would purchase a batch of goods from Rodriguez, which would allow them to finally detain the dealer. Joe agreed and purchased substances worth $1,500. This enabled law enforcement to detain Rodriguez on November 18, 1996. However, the arrest was only the beginning of a complex struggle. The dealer intended to fight for his freedom by any means. Numerous criminal rumors circulated around Gilbert. Local residents had serious suspicions about his involvement in deaths. In particular, there were discussions about the mysterious circumstances of the deaths of two young people, a young man named Blake Morgan and Regina Krieger. Striking parallels were observed in these crimes. Blake was also killed at night in his own house, with attackers entering unnoticed. The only difference was that, unlike Regina, Blake was not kidnapped. On April 10, 1996, the investigation managed to identify the attackers on Blake. They turned out to be Paul, a client and friend of Gilbert, and his half-brother Jesus, who unconditionally admired his relative's criminal activities. Jesus perceived Gilbert as a role model and unconditionally followed any of his instructions. This devotion had deep roots. Rodriguez had effectively replaced his father, purposefully preparing him to participate in his own criminal schemes. Unexpectedly, drugs were not the reason for the attack on Blake. The boy did not even use prohibited substances. The true motive was hidden in personal relationships. Gilbert's girlfriend named Angela claimed that Blake had once offended and hit her. Just 2 weeks before Regina's death, a fateful incident occurred in a local bar. Gilbert, upon meeting, ordered Jesus to take revenge, to kill his girlfriend's offender. The criminals decided to act as carefully as possible. Instead of an immediate attack, they planned an assault at night, sometime between 2 and 3 o'clock, when Blake would be sleeping. For a prolonged period, the circumstances of a brutal crime remained unresolved, but gradually, the picture of tragic events became increasingly clearer. Law enforcement initially failed to identify the direct perpetrators of the crime, rendering their actions largely ineffective. The criminals first unsuccessfully attempted to enter the premises, but to no avail. However, they did not abandon their intentions. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, when the entire couple and children were sleeping soundly, the perpetrators finally entered the house by kicking in the entrance door. The direct executors of the murder were Cody and Jesus, who acted in collusion with Gil. The latter proved to be an exceptionally cautious and manipulative accomplice who observed the course of the crime but did not directly participate in the physical murder. Blake was killed instantly. A shot directly to the head made his death immediate. Gil acted so cunningly and carefully that law enforcement initially did not even consider him a suspect. His manipulative strategy was to use other perpetrators and remain unnoticed. All 3 criminals were subsequently arrested and held in custody. They were formally charged with first-degree murder of Blake. However, at that time, law enforcement did not even attempt to connect this crime with the case of the missing Regina Krieger. The position of the investigators was strange, as they, contrary to logic and available evidence, ignored the testimony of hired witnesses. Moreover, they did not believe even obvious rumors about the similarity of crimes. During this period, the dangerous dealer Huberta was in prison awaiting sentencing. The state-controlled substances management was trying to identify possible witnesses. Among the inmates, Huberta was saying that he would like to know the names of these people, as he had already dealt with 2 informants. On June 26, 1997, Huberta was officially sentenced to 30 years in prison, but he unexpectedly received early release, having served only 10 years. The police somehow completely stopped investigating Regina's case. Detectives did not link her disappearance to the dealer, although all traces undoubtedly led to him. The case materials sat in the police department's archive filing cabinet for many years. An unexpected turn occurred thanks to Cody Thompson, a former associate of Rodriguez, who also had contacts with the dealer. The young man had kept silent for a long time, but ultimately the information was revealed. In 2013, a new investigator decided to reopen the investigation. Carefully studying all previous evidence, he paid attention to the bloody traces that clearly indicated the victim was dragged down the stairs and taken out to the backyard. What remained strange was why previous detectives had not noticed this. The investigator paid special attention to Cody, who by then was already serving a life sentence. Previously, his testimony had been extremely confusing. By that time, he was 31 years old, and his criminal biography included serious crimes, burglary, escapes, and murders. Almost 2 decades later, the new law enforcement officer finally connected the obvious facts. The detective was convinced of the criminal's involvement in Regina's murder, but they all confidently remained silent. A crucial breakthrough occurred after contact with Cody's former cellmate, a life-sentenced inmate who had been in prison since 2009. Having nothing to lose, he agreed to cooperate with the police. Thanks to his testimony, they were able to reconstruct the events of that tragic night when 14-year-old Regina was brutally murdered. According to the testimony, late in the evening of February 27, 1995, the girl went to sleep after 11 p.m. together with her entire family. On that fatal night, the residents of the house where Regina lived were not even suspecting the terrible tragedy that was about to happen. Sleep enveloped each inhabitant, creating an illusion of complete safety and tranquility. At the same time, Gilbert and Cody were wandering the city's night streets, making an aimless journey. Suddenly, Diller remembered an unfinished business and decided to stop near Regina's house. Gilbert carefully parked the car in a dark alley, as close as possible to the residence. Cody remained in the car, observing his partner's actions. Gilbert, using darkness and bushes as a natural camouflage, silently jumped over the fence, using the back entrance. He entered the house independently, leaving Cody waiting in the car. After some time, Gilbert returned, calling Cody out of the automobile. His face was tense and agitated. He reported that something had gone wrong and he had done something stupid, therefore requesting help. His words were filled with inner fear and panic. Soon Gilbert emerged from the house, carrying a heavy object wrapped in a bloody blanket that resembled a human body. Cody helped load the wrapped object into the trunk, not even understanding the full picture of what had occurred. During their subsequent journey, Gilbert got rid of the crime weapon, the knife, throwing it nearby. The criminals headed to a party where Rodriguez, not concealing anything, appeared with blood stains on his clothing. This fact obviously raised suspicions among other participants of the gathering, who subsequently even telephoned the police. After the party, they visited a mutual friend's house, where they changed clothes and washed away the bloody traces. Their route lay to a remote bridge located in wild territories. It was there that Gilbert, under the threat of a weapon, forced Cody to throw the body into the water. Returning home, the underage Cody was in a state of deep shock. He behaved extremely nervously, screaming in his sleep, which immediately attracted the attention of his relatives. However, the boy carefully concealed the horrible secret, fearing revenge from Gilbert, who threatened not only him but also his family. Only later at school did Cody realize that he had thrown Regina's body into the river, a girl whose disappearance was actively discussed in the area. The awareness of his own involvement in the crime caused him a panicked state. During communication with detectives, Cody confirmed information previously provided by his cellmate. As compensation for cooperation, no additional charges were brought against him in Regina Krieger's case. However, at that moment, he was already serving a life sentence. On February 20, 2019, Diller Gilbert Rodriguez was arrested on charges of murdering Regina Krieger. Despite the evidence, he stubbornly did not admit his guilt. However, new witnesses emerged who had seen him at the party in bloody clothing, along with anonymous testimonies. In October 2021, 58-year-old Gilbert Flores Rodriguez was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The 26-year wait for justice had ended. The verdict became a relief not only for the deceased's family but for the entire city. Finally, a dangerous criminal was forever deprived of the opportunity to harm society. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, friends.